When you hear the name Epicurus, what comes to mind? For many, it's images of hedonism, lavish feasts, indulgent pleasures, and a life of boundless luxury. But what if this picture is entirely wrong? What if Epicurus, so often painted as a philosopher of sensual excess, was actually a quiet advocate for moderation, friendship, and inner peace? This massive misunderstanding has endured for centuries, coloring both ancient and modern interpretations of his work. The truth is, Epicurus was one of the most misrepresented thinkers of antiquity. While his philosophy centered on pleasure, the kind of pleasure he advocated was far from the indulgence of appetites. Instead, it was about tranquility, simplicity, and the freedom from fear, principles that are surprisingly aligned with modern ideas of mindfulness and well-being. So how did such a peaceful philosophy become synonymous with excess? Welcome to the unfolding journey, where we explore the great ideas that have shaped human thought, and question the ways they've been remembered, misunderstood, and reinterpreted. In today's episode, we'll explore the reasons behind the distortion of Epicurus' teachings in antiquity, the cultural and philosophical rivalries that fueled this misrepresentation, and how his true message is more relevant than ever in the modern world. Epicurus was born in 341 BCE on the island of Samos and founded his school, the Garden, in Athens around 306 BCE. His philosophy was based on the pursuit of ataraxia, a state of serene calmness, and aponia, the absence of physical pain. Together, these formed his concept of true pleasure. Epicurus taught that we should not fear the gods nor death, and that the good life is attainable through the cultivation of simple pleasures, friendship, and intellectual reflection. He encouraged the pursuit of modest desires, the enjoyment of nature, and the avoidance of unnecessary pain and anxiety. In stark contrast to the reputation that would follow him, Epicurus himself lived a remarkably austere life. He ate simply, preferred water to wine, and found joy in conversation and companionship rather than luxury or spectacle. So how did such a modest philosopher come to be remembered as a symbol of indulgence? The root of the confusion lies in the word hedon, Greek for pleasure. Epicurus boldly declared that pleasure is the highest good, but his definition of pleasure was deeply philosophical, not sensual. To Epicurus, pleasure meant the absence of pain in the body, aponia, and disturbance in the soul, ataraxia. This is often referred to as static pleasure, the satisfaction and calm that comes when our needs are met and we are not suffering. However, to many of his critics and even casual readers, pleasure meant only kinetic pleasure, the excitement of the senses. This semantic confusion opened the door for centuries of misrepresentation. Many assumed Epicurus was promoting unrestrained indulgence when in fact, he cautioned against it, warning that such pursuits often led to greater pain. Epicurus' rivals, especially the Stoics and certain Platonists, played a significant role in shaping his public image. In a time when schools of thought competed for students, funding, and influence, philosophical slander was not uncommon. Stoics, in particular, opposed the Epicurean emphasis on pleasure. They viewed virtue as the sole good and pleasure as a distraction. To discredit Epicurus, some Stoics portrayed him as a moral libertine, leading a school of gluttony rather than philosophy. Cicero, a Roman statesman and Stoic sympathizer, criticized Epicureanism frequently. Though Cicero admitted that Epicureans led morally upright lives, he insisted that their underlying doctrine was inconsistent with such virtue. His criticisms, widely read in antiquity, further cemented the caricature of Epicurus as a philosopher of excess. Another reason for the distortion of Epicureanism was its accessibility. Unlike the Stoics and Platonists, who often appealed to elite, educated classes, Epicurus opened his school to women, slaves, and common people, groups typically excluded from philosophical circles. This democratization of philosophy was threatening to traditional elites, who may have viewed Epicureanism as too inclusive or subversive. Some scholars believe that part of the backlash against Epicurus stemmed from classist disdain for his openness and egalitarian values. Moreover, Epicurus eschewed public life and politics, preferring a quiet, communal existence. In a culture that often glorified public service and political engagement, his withdrawal was seen as unpatriotic or even cowardly. Critics may have used misrepresentation to marginalize what they viewed as a dangerous deviation from traditional values. Much of what we know about Epicurus comes from his opponents. Most of his 300-plus written works have been lost, and what remains are fragments, many preserved by authors who disagreed with him. This one-sided preservation meant that Epicurus could not speak for himself in later generations. His ideas were interpreted and filtered through the lenses of those who had incentives to distort them. Without access to the full context of his work, many readers were left with a misleading picture. Fortunately, texts like the Principal Doctrines and Letter to Municius survive and give us a clearer window into his actual beliefs. But even these are short and require careful interpretation. In truth, Epicurus' philosophy is a surprisingly gentle and practical approach to life. It emphasizes simple living, avoiding excess to reduce pain and anxiety, friendship, the most important source of happiness, intellectual reflection, understanding nature to free ourselves from fear, freedom from fear, especially the fear of death and divine punishment, self-sufficiency, cultivating inner resources rather than external wealth. Rather than an endorsement of indulgence, Epicureanism is a roadmap to serenity. It is a life philosophy centered on balance, reason, and meaningful relationships. In a time when many struggle with anxiety, burnout, and a sense of disconnection, Epicurus offers an antidote. His advice to simplify our lives, focus on friendships, and release our fear of death speaks directly to modern concerns. As we wade through a culture that often promotes consumerism and individualism, Epicureanism reminds us to step back, reflect, and prioritize what truly brings peace and joy. It's not the flashy or the fast-paced that leads to happiness, but the quiet, the consistent, and the deeply human. As Christianity rose to prominence, Epicureanism became increasingly suspect. Early Christians rejected materialism and the idea that the gods, or God, did not intervene in human affairs. Epicurus' view that the gods were indifferent and that the soul perished with the body clashed fundamentally with Christian doctrine. Church leaders, such as Augustine, criticized Epicureanism as atheistic and morally bankrupt. The association of Epicurus with the denial of divine judgment made him an easy target for religious denunciation. This legacy lingered through the Middle Ages and into modern times, where Epicurean became synonymous with self-indulgence and moral decay. Epicurus may have been misunderstood in antiquity, but we now have the tools to rediscover his true philosophy. Thanks to scholars, preserved texts, and a growing interest in ancient wisdom, we can now see that the caricature of Epicurus as a glutton was just that, a caricature, drawn by rivals and reinforced by centuries of misinterpretation. He was not a preacher of indulgence, but a teacher of tranquility. He did not call for hedonism, but for harmony. And perhaps most importantly, he showed us that the good life is not out of reach. It begins with simple pleasures, meaningful friendships, and a calm mind. Thank you for joining us on this philosophical exploration. If this episode helped you see Epicurus in a new light, don't forget to subscribe to the Unfolding Journey YouTube channel. We dive deep into the philosophies that shaped the world and continue to shape us. Like, share, and leave a comment about how this philosophy resonates with your own life. Let's continue the journey together, one idea at a time. See you in the next video.